I stood in the kitchen, the chef's knife in my hand falling onto the cutting board in a steady rhythm, slicing the crisp green cucumber into uniform, thin pieces. The evening sun streamed in through the window, casting a warm golden glow on the countertop. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of the knife hitting the board was especially clear in the quiet kitchen. 3 years ago, after Arthur passed away, I moved in with my son, Julian. Leo had just been born, and Clara's maternity leave was ending. She had to go back to work, and they really needed someone to help around the house. I still remember what Julian said when he came to pick me up. "Mom, we don't feel right with you living all alone. Come live with us. You can help look after Leo, too." That phrase, "help look after Leo, too," sounded a bit sharp at the time, but I didn't let it bother me. My grandson needed me. That was enough. I put the sliced cucumbers onto a plate and took 2 tomatoes out of the refrigerator. Julian always loved the meatloaf I used to make. As a child, he could eat 2 huge helpings with a single serving. Thinking of my son, the corners of my mouth turned up in a smile. Even though he was now a successful department manager, in my eyes, he would always be that chubby little boy with 2 dimples when he smiled. "Grandma, Grandma," a tender, childish voice called from the living room, accompanied by the pitter-patter of tiny feet. My little Leo ran into the kitchen and threw his arms around my leg. "Whoa there, my little treasure, slow down," I said, quickly putting down the knife, wiping my hands, and bending down to pick him up. 3-year-old Leo was heavy in my arms, his round eyes just like his father's when he was a boy. "Grandma, look!" Leo held up a colorful drawing, covered in a few crooked lines and shapes. "What is this?" "Let Grandma guess," I said, pretending to think. "Is it a car?" "No," Leo giggled. "It's a big dinosaur." "Wow, so it's a big dinosaur. You drew it so well," I said, kissing his little cheek. "How about we show it to Daddy when he gets home?" "When is Daddy coming home?" he asked. I looked up at the clock on the wall. It was already 6:20. Soon. Daddy's on his way home from work." Just as I said that, we heard the sound of the front door unlocking. Leo slipped out of my arms and shot towards the door like a little cannonball. "Daddy!" I followed him to the entryway and saw Julian bending down to pick up Leo, his face tired but wearing a happy smile. My son was dressed in a sharp suit, his tie slightly loosened, and fine lines had started to appear at the corners of his eyes. Time really flies. "Mom," Julian nodded at me, hoisting Leo onto his shoulders. "There was some great news at the office today." "What good news?" I asked, taking his briefcase. I could smell a faint scent of sweat. He got that from his father, always sweating easily. Julian's eyes lit up, his voice an octave higher. "I got promoted." "To department manager? Really?" I clapped my hands in delight. "That's wonderful. I knew my son was capable. Hold on, Mom will add a couple more dishes. We have to celebrate properly." I turned to go back to the kitchen, but Julian stopped me. "No need, Mom. I've already booked a private room at the Oak Room. I'm treating my department colleagues to dinner. Clara is coming straight from the mall over there. I just came back to change my clothes. And then I'm leaving." My hand froze in midair. I slowly turned around. "Oh, that's very nice. You young people go celebrate. I'll just stay home and watch Leo." Julian didn't seem to notice my disappointment. Loosening his tie, he said, "We're taking Leo too. My in-laws are already waiting there." My heart suddenly sank. "Your in-laws?" The words left my mouth before I realized he meant Clara's parents. "Yeah, Clara said the whole family has to be there for such a happy occasion," Julian said, draping his suit jacket over the back of the sofa. "Mom, don't trouble yourself. There are leftovers in the fridge. You can just heat them up and eat." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Okay, you all go have a good time." Julian quickly took a shower, changed his clothes, and left with Leo in his arms. After the sound of the door closing, the only thing left in the kitchen was the gurgling of the soup simmering on the stove. I slowly walked back into the kitchen, turned off the heat, and looked at the ingredients I had prepared. Suddenly, I had no appetite to cook. The Oak Room was a high-end restaurant Clara's parents went to often. Arthur and I had only been to places like that a few times in our entire lives. "Forget it," I muttered to myself. "I'm too old to get used to that fancy food anyway." I wrapped the cucumber and tomatoes in plastic wrap and put them back in the refrigerator. In the freezer, there was still half a dish of leftover meatloaf from yesterday and a bowl of rice. That was enough dinner for one person. Just as the microwave beeped, my phone rang. It was a text from Clara. "Mom, remember to eat the leftovers in the kitchen fridge. Don't let them go to waste." I was about to reply when another message came in. It was a photo. In a luxurious private room, Julian stood in the middle, holding a glass of wine. Clara and her parents sat on either side of him. Leo was on his maternal grandfather's lap, and everyone at the table was beaming. In the corner of the photo, I could even see Julian's sister and brother-in-law. So, the entire family was there. I was the only one missing. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment before I finally replied with a single word. "Okay." I placed my phone face down on the dining table, the plastic case making a crisp clicking sound against the glass. The leftover meatloaf in the microwave gave off a rich, savory aroma, but I had suddenly lost my appetite. The clock in the living room pointed to 7:30, and it was completely dark outside. I mechanically carried my food to the coffee table and turned on the television. The local evening news was on, the anchorwoman's bright red lips opening and closing. I didn't hear a single word. My fingers, as if with a mind of their own, unlocked my phone and opened the photo album, scrolling to pictures from 3 years ago. It was the first New Year's after Arthur passed away. Our whole family took a group photo at the portrait studio near our building. Julian stood in the middle, with me on his left and Clara on his right. Leo was surrounded by the three of us, sitting on a small stool in the front row. Back then, I was still a part of the family portrait. A burst of laughter from the television pulled me back to reality. A family sitcom was playing on the screen. The actors were gathered around a dining table, talking and laughing. I turned off the TV, and the room instantly fell silent, save for the occasional hum of the refrigerator's compressor. Getting up, I walked towards Julian's bedroom, or I should say, their master bedroom now. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open gently, and my eyes were met with a huge wedding photo hanging on the wall above the bed. Clara was in a pure white wedding gown, and Julian was in a black suit. They were smiling radiantly in the picture. I remember that wedding dress was custom-made. It cost nearly $3,000, which was half of Arthur's and my annual pension. The vanity was covered with bottles and jars. I recognized a few as the expensive skincare products Julian had given Clara for her last birthday. Next to it was an exquisite jewelry box filled with gold pieces, most of which Arthur and I had given them over the years. In the most prominent spot was a diamond necklace that Julian had bought for their 5th wedding anniversary last year. I gently closed the door and turned to Leo's room. The children's room was a riot of color, with cartoon stickers on the walls and toys piled in the corner. I picked up the teddy bear from his bedside. I had sewn it myself when Leo was born. It was a little worn now, but Leo always had to hug it to sleep. "At least Leo still needs me," I murmured, putting the bear back in its place. Back in the living room, my gaze fell on the family photo albums on the bookshelf. I took down the most recent one. A thin layer of dust had settled on the cover. I opened the first page. It was a black and white photo of Julian at 1 month old, a tiny thing wrapped in a swaddle. My own young face was beaming with the joy of new motherhood. Flipping through, there was Julian's first day of kindergarten, clinging to my shirt and refusing to let go. At his elementary school graduation, he wore a big red corsage and recited a poem on stage. In middle school, he won first prize in a math competition, smiling shyly on the awards podium. The day his college acceptance letter arrived, the whole family set off firecrackers in the yard to celebrate. Every single photo documented the little things and the big things I had done for my son. To get him into a good school district, Arthur and I scrimped and saved to buy that house. To pay for his tutoring, I didn't buy any new clothes for 3 years straight. The year he took the SATs, I woke up at 4 o'clock every morning to make him soup to keep his strength up. My phone suddenly rang, jolting me out of my memories. The screen showed Carol, an old neighbor and one of the few old friends I still kept in touch with. "Hello, Eleanor? Have you eaten?" Carol's loud voice came through the receiver. Yes, I've eaten. How about you?" I tried to make my voice sound normal. "I just finished. I was bored, so I thought I'd give you a call," Carol said, then paused. Oh, by the way, I heard your Julian got a promotion. Clara ran into me in the neighborhood today. She was so happy, said they'll finally be able to get a bigger house now. My fingers unconsciously tightened on the edge of the photo album. A bigger house? Yeah, Clara said they've got their eye on that new development on the east side, those townhouses called Willow Creek Estates. Carol's voice was filled with envy. Your Julian is so successful. A sharp pain shot through my stomach. Julian had never mentioned anything to me about moving. Eleanor, are you there? Ah, yes, I'm listening, I managed to reply. It's not set in stone yet. You know how Clara likes to talk ahead of things. True, Carol said, changing the subject. By the way, when are you coming back to the old house for a visit? The community is registering for demolition notices, and it looks like your building is within the scope. Demolition? I was completely stunned. Since when? Just in the last couple of weeks, the notices are all posted. The compensation plan looks pretty good too. Carol's tone became puzzled. What? Julian didn't tell you. I took a deep breath. He might have. My memory isn't so good lately. After a few more pleasantries, I hung up, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Demolition? A new house? These were huge things. And I, his mother, was hearing about them from someone else. I walked out onto the balcony. The early summer night breeze was slightly cool. In the distance, the city's neon lights flickered, the silhouettes of skyscrapers faint in the darkness. Julian and the others were probably at the Oak Room right now, glasses clinking, celebrating. Were Clara's parents bragging about their businessman's son-in-law again? Was Julian's sister introducing Clara to her circle of wealthy friends? And me? I was only fit to eat leftovers at home, not even told about something as major as the demolition of my own home. Back inside, I opened the album again, stopping on the night of Julian's college graduation. In the photo, he wore a cap and gown, his arms around Arthur's and my shoulders. The three of us were smiling so brightly under the sunday. Back then, I was still an important person in his life. My finger traced Julian's young face in the picture, and a tear fell uncontrollably onto the album. I hastily wiped it away, but more followed. Oh, Arthur, I whispered to my husband's gentle, smiling face in the photo. Our son is all grown up. He doesn't need me anymore. I closed the album and went to the bathroom to wash my face. The woman in the mirror had red, swollen eyes, and the wrinkles seemed deeper than last year. 68 years old. At an age when others were enjoying their grandchildren, I was feeling more and more out of place. Back in my bedroom, I opened the closet, my eyes falling on a small suitcase in the corner. It was the one Arthur used during his last hospital stay, filled with his clothes and daily necessities. When he was discharged, the suitcase was empty. Most of his things were left at the hospital or thrown away. I pulled out the suitcase and dusted it off. The wheels were a bit stuck, but it still worked. I opened it. A faint smell of disinfectant still lingered inside. Just for a few days, I told myself, and began packing a few changes of clothes and some toiletries. I'll go stay with Helen for a few days, just to clear my head. Helen was a former colleague of mine. Her husband had passed away early, and she lived alone in an old apartment complex on the north side of the city. We talked on the phone occasionally, and she always told me to come and stay with her for a few days when I had the time. After packing, I sat on the edge of the bed and wrote a note. I'm going to stay at Helen's for a few days. Don't worry about me. I thought for a moment and added, there's some mac and cheese in the fridge. Leo likes it. I stuck the note on the refrigerator and took one last look around the house I had lived in for 3 years. The living room I cleaned every day, the kitchen where I carefully prepared every meal, the small table and chairs where Leo scribbled his drawings. I had given so much, yet I felt like an invisible person. The moment I closed the door, I heard something inside me break. As the elevator descended, I gripped the handle of the suitcase tightly, as if it were the only thing I could hold on to. As I walked out of the building's main entrance, the security guard, Mike, looked at my suitcase curiously. Mrs. Eleanor, heading out so late? Yes, going to stay with an old friend for a few days. I managed to smile. Take care now. Be safe. Mike waved warmly. I nodded and dragged my suitcase towards the bus stop. The last bus had already left, so I had to hail a taxi. Where to? the driver asked. I gave him Helen's address, and then leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes. The car drove into the night, the distance from home growing farther and farther. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Clara. "Mom, where did you put Leo's formula? We're almost home." I looked at the screen and didn't reply. Let Julian find it himself. He should remember a little of how I took care of him when he was a child. The taxi stopped at a red light. Outside the window, a family of 3 was crossing the street. The young parents held their little girl's hands between them. They said something, and all 3 of them laughed. My vision blurred again. Once upon a time, Arthur and I held Julian's hand just like that, thinking that such happiness would last forever. "We're here," the driver's voice pulled me back to the present. After paying the fare, I stood downstairs from Helen's apartment, suddenly hesitant. Was it appropriate to disturb her so late? Would she think I was strange? While I was hesitating, my phone rang again. This time it was Julian. "Mom, where did you go?" "Leo has been crying for his grandma." I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm at Helen's for a few days. You two take good care of Leo." After sending the message, I turned off my phone. Tonight, just for once, I would be selfish. Dragging my suitcase upstairs, I stood in front of Helen's door and rang the doorbell. In the few seconds I waited for the door to open, I suddenly realized this was the first decision I had made for myself in 3 years. When Helen opened the door, her eyes widened like saucers. "Eleanor, my goodness, what is all this? Can I stay for a few days?" My voice was hoarser than I expected. Helen immediately pulled me inside and took my suitcase. "What happened? Is it Julian and his family?" "It's nothing. I just wanted to get some fresh air." I forced a smile, but the muscles on my face felt stiff and disobedient. Helen's apartment was small, a 1-bedroom, but it was neat and tidy. A photo of her and her late husband hung on the wall. A few green plants sat by the television. The air had a faint scent of sandalwood, and an open book and a pair of reading glasses lay on the coffee table. "Have you eaten?" "I can heat up some soup for you," Helen asked with concern. "No, thank you, I've already eaten." I put down my bag and was suddenly overcome with exhaustion. My legs felt as heavy as lead. Helen, sensing my condition, didn't press further. "Then you go take a hot shower first. I'll make up the bed for you." The sofa pulls out into a bed. It's very comfortable. As the hot water washed over my body, I realized I had been trembling the whole time. The steam fogged up the bathroom mirror, blurring my vision along with it. For 3 years, this was the first time I had showered in a bathroom without Leo's noisy interruptions, without rushing out to see if he had fallen or bumped into something. Wearing the clean pajamas Helen had prepared for me, I walked out of the bathroom to find she had already made the sofa bed. A glass of warm milk sat on the bedside table. "Drink some milk. It'll help you sleep," Helen said, patting my shoulder. "Whatever it is, we can talk about it tomorrow. For tonight, just get a good rest." I nodded gratefully, drank the milk, and snuggled into the soft blankets. Helen turned off the living room light, leaving only a small nightlight on. My body was extremely tired, but my mind was wide awake. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of cars occasionally passing outside, my thoughts racing. Had Julian and his family gotten home? What would they think when they saw my note? Was Leo crying? Did they find the mac and cheese in the fridge? My phone was still off. I didn't dare turn it on. I was afraid of seeing Julian's questioning texts, and I was afraid I would soften. After Arthur passed, Julian became my entire emotional support. Now, even tears welled up again. I quietly wiped them away, not wanting Helen in the next room to hear. The pillow smelled of sunshine. Helen must have aired it out today. This small, considerate gesture made the feeling of being neglected at home even more acute. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but I dreamed of Arthur standing in the distance, waving at me. I wanted to run to him, but a small hand held me back. It was Leo. He was crying, "Grandma, don't go." I was torn. The morning sun shone through the curtains onto my face. I opened my eyes, momentarily disoriented, until I saw the familiar furnishings of Helen's home and remembered the events of last night. Helen was already up. The smell of frying eggs wafted from the kitchen. I sat up and noticed an extra blanket covering me. Helen must have added it during the night. "You're awake," Helen said, carrying breakfast out from the kitchen. "Fried eggs, oatmeal, and some pickles I made. Just something simple." I thanked her and sat down at the small dining table. The breakfast was simple, but it reminded me of the days before I retired, eating with Helen in the company cafeteria. Life was busy then, but at least I had my own life. "Now, can you tell me what happened?" Helen sat down across from me and asked softly. I stirred the oatmeal in my bowl and told her everything that had happened yesterday. Julian's promotion celebration that I wasn't invited to, Clara's text telling me to eat the leftovers, and hearing about the demolition and moving plans from Carol. Helen's brow furrowed deeper and deeper. "That's just too much. Not telling you about something as big as the demolition. What I want to know most right now is what's really going on with the old house," I said, putting down my chopsticks. "Julian probably thought I didn't care about these things, so he didn't mention it." "Well, that's easy enough to find out. I'll go with you to the old building to take a look." Helen stood up decisively. "The notice must be posted on the community bulletin board." After breakfast, we took a bus to the old neighborhood where I used to live. Along the way, the scenery outside the window grew more and more familiar. The grocery store Arthur and I used to frequent, the kindergarten Julian attended, the park where our family used to walk on weekends. I hadn't been back in 3 years. Not much had changed, it was just a bit older. Walking through the community gate, my heart began to beat faster. This was the sycamore tree Julian had crashed into while learning to ride his bike. That was the stone bench where Arthur loved to sit and cool off in the summer. A few old neighbors were gathered in front of the bulletin board. When they saw me, they greeted me with surprise. "Eleanor, long time no see." After some small talk, I looked at the bulletin board. Sure enough, a conspicuous notice of intent for demolition was posted right in the middle. It clearly stated that our building was within the demolition scope and required homeowners to register with the community office within 2 weeks. "Your Julian came by last week," said Mr. Robert, who lived across the hall from me. "He brought a stack of documents and talked to the community office people for a long time." A tightness grew in my chest. "What did he say?" "I'm not sure about the details." Seemed like he was asking about the compensation money. Mr. Robert shook his head. "Your place is large. The compensation should be quite a lot." Helen gently squeezed my hand. "Do you want to go ask at the community office?" The community office was right in the center of the complex. The staff member, Sarah, was an enthusiastic young woman who had often helped Arthur with his pension matters. "Mrs. Eleanor," Sarah stood up in surprise. "I haven't seen you in so long." I managed a smile and got straight to the point. "Sarah, I'd like to ask about the demolition of our building." Sarah flipped through a registration book. "Building 3, Unit 2, 502. The homeowner is Arthur Chen. Your son was here last week. He submitted copies of the property deed and IDs. The preliminary compensation estimate is around $300,000. $300,000? The number made my vision go dark. After Arthur passed, the house was naturally inherited by both Julian and me. Although I had been living there, his name was indeed on the deed. "So, what's the status now?" I tried to remain calm. "It's already in the assessment stage," Sarah explained. "Once the assessment results are out and the agreement is signed, the compensation can be disbursed within 3 months. She hesitated for a moment. "Your son said you weren't in good health and that he was fully authorized to handle everything. Is there a problem?" "A huge problem." I fought back my anger. "No, I just came to find out." Walking out of the community office, my legs felt weak. I had to lean against the wall to stand. Helen looked at me with concern. "Eleanor, are you okay?" "They're handling the demolition behind my back." My voice trembled. $300,000 in compensation. What does Julian plan to do with it? Buy a townhouse for Clara? "Let's not jump to conclusions," Helen advised. "Maybe Julian wanted to give you a surprise." I gave a bitter laugh. What kind of surprise needs to be kept from me? Standing in front of the old house I had lived in for over 20 years, I took out my key. I had never removed this key from my keyring. I inserted it into the lock, turned it, and the door opened. A musty smell hit me. The furniture was all covered in white cloths, and a thin layer of dust had accumulated on the floor. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the curtains, illuminating the floating dust particles in the air. My footsteps left clear prints on the wooden floor. Everything here was so familiar: the rocking chair Arthur loved, the porcelain vase I used for flower arrangements, the basketball scuff mark Julian left on the wall in middle school. Our wedding photo still hung above the bed in the master bedroom. A young Arthur, handsome and tall, with me leaning shyly on his shoulder. The photo had yellowed, but the happiness felt like it was just yesterday. In the study, Julian's awards and trophies from childhood were neatly arranged on the bookshelf. Arthur always said he wanted to keep these for his grandson, to let him know how outstanding his father was. Julian's college class schedule was still stuck to the kitchen refrigerator with a magnet I bought on a trip to Washington, D.C. There was a crack on the windowsill by the sink, from a cup Julian had thrown in a fit of teenage anger. Every corner held a memory. And now, all of it was about to be leveled by bulldozers. What hurt even more was that my own son planned to handle all of this behind my back. "Eleanor, look at this," Helen said, holding a stack of documents she had found in a drawer in the study. I took the documents. It was the demolition office's assessment report and compensation plan. Julian's signature was already on it. There was also a power of attorney form with a signature that sloppily imitated mine. I knew my own handwriting too well. This was definitely not my signature. He forged my signature. My voice was barely a whisper. Helen gasped. This is illegal." I mechanically flipped through the documents when I suddenly found a note tucked into the last page. It was written by Julian to Clara. "Honey, once the demolition money comes through, don't tell Mom at first. We'll bring her over to live with us after we buy the townhouse, so she doesn't worry about the money. I've already designed the basement as her room. It's close to the kitchen, convenient for her to cook." The basement. My room was in the basement. The world started to spin. I collapsed into Arthur's rocking chair. It let out a familiar creak. Once upon a time, Arthur sat here, holding a young Julian and telling him stories. Later, Julian sat here studying for his exams, and later, "Eleanor, what are you going to do?" Helen asked worriedly. I took a deep breath and suddenly made a decision. "I'm going to stay here for a few days." "Here?" Helen looked around, but the utilities should still be on. I stood up and pulled the dust cover off the sofa. "I need time to think, and I need evidence." Helen tried to dissuade me, but seeing the look on my face, she gave up. "Then at least let me help you clean up a bit." We worked together, quickly cleaning the dust from the living room and bedroom. Helen went to the corner store downstairs to buy some daily necessities and food. Meanwhile, I plugged in my phone to charge it and turned it on. Dozens of unread messages and missed calls popped up, mostly from Julian, with a few from Clara. The most recent one was from Julian, sent 10 minutes ago. "Mom, where on earth are you?" Leo cried all night. "We're all so worried about you." I hesitated for a moment, then replied, "I'm at the old house. I want to be alone for a few days. Don't worry." The message had just been sent when the phone rang. It was Julian. "Mom, why did you go to the old house? No one's lived there for so long." "It's not safe." Julian's voice was clearly frantic. "I'm coming to get you right now." "No need," I said calmly. "I want to stay here for a few days to remember my time with your father. But Leo keeps crying for his grandma." Julian played his trump card. My heart did soften for a second, but then I remembered the documents and the note, and it hardened again. "You two are his parents. It's time you learn to take care of your child on your own. I'll be back on the weekend." I hung up and looked at Helen. "Can you do me a favor? I want to consult a lawyer." Helen nodded. "My nephew is a lawyer. He specializes in real estate disputes. I'll call him right now." That afternoon, Helen's nephew, David, came to the old house. He was a young man in his early 30s, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, and he spoke clearly and methodically. After listening to my story and reviewing the documents, David pushed up his glasses. "Mrs. Chen, first of all, forging a signature is illegal. This power of attorney is invalid. Secondly, this house was the joint property of you and your husband. After he passed away, both you and your son are legal heirs, each holding a certain percentage. Any disposal of the property requires the consent of both parties." "So what should I do now?" I asked. "First, You should go to the community office and revoke that power of attorney, stating that you do not agree with the current arrangement, David said. Secondly, I suggest you have a serious talk with your son to understand his true intentions. After seeing David out, I sat on the newly made bed, watching the sunset through the window. The old house was quiet. Every evening, the sunlight would stream in just like this. Arthur always called it the golden hour. My phone rang again. This time it was Clara. "Mom, please don't be angry. We didn't mean to not invite you to dinner. We just thought you wouldn't like that kind of occasion. Leo really misses you." I didn't reply. It wasn't that I disliked the occasion, it was that I disliked being excluded. It wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. As night fell, the familiar sounds of the old house began to emerge. One by one, the occasional gurgle of the water pipes, the soft whistle of the wind through the windows, the faint sound of the neighbor's television downstairs. These sounds, which once formed the background of my daily life, now sounded so dear. I decided to stay here for a few days to think carefully about the road ahead. 68 years old might not be too old. It might still be possible to start over. When the morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains, I momentarily thought Arthur was still beside me. I reached out to the other side of the bed, only to touch a cold sheet. Only then did I fully wake up. Mornings in the old house were exceptionally quiet. There were no cries from Leo, no hurried footsteps from Julian, no sound of Clara blow-drying her hair. There was only the occasional birdsong from outside the window, and the sound of the old man downstairs clearing his throat. I got out of bed and opened the curtains. The May sunshine streamed in gently. On the balcony of the building opposite, a few neighbors were hanging out their laundry. Old Mr. Zhao from the third floor saw me and waved in surprise. I nodded back in acknowledgement. In the kitchen, I boiled a pot of water and made a cup of jasmine tea. It was left over from 3 years ago, and the flavor had faded, but it would do. Holding the teacup, I stood on the balcony overlooking the neighborhood. In the central garden, a few elderly people were practicing Tai Chi, while children chased each other, a picture of peace. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Helen. "Are you awake? Do you need me to bring you breakfast?" I replied that it wasn't necessary, that I could manage on my own. After hanging up, I suddenly realized this was the first morning in 3 years where no one needed me to take care of them. The breakfast stall at the neighborhood entrance was still there. The lady selling pancakes actually recognized me. "Oh, Mrs. Chen, long time no see. You look the same as ever." I nodded, a warmth spreading through my chest. The smell of the pancakes reminded me of the days I used to buy breakfast for Julian. He would always grab the pancake in a hurry and run off to school, with me shouting after him, "Slow down, don't choke." Back in the old house, I ate my pancake while reviewing yesterday's documents. David was right. I should first revoke that forged power of attorney. But deep down, I still hoped to have a good talk with Julian. I didn't want things to get ugly. Just as I was thinking, the phone rang. The screen showed Julian. I took a deep breath before answering. "Mom, are you okay at the old house?" Julian's voice sounded exhausted. I could faintly hear Leo crying in the background. "I'm fine," I answered calmly. "What's wrong with Leo?" "He's been crying since last night, won't eat his breakfast. He just wants his grandma." Julian sighed. "Clara's going to be late for work, and Mom, when are you coming back?" I gripped the phone tightly, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I told you, I'll be back on the weekend. You two are his parents. You need to learn to handle these things." "But no buts," I interrupted him. "I've taken care of Leo for 3 years, since he was a baby. You can't even manage for 3 days?" There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then Julian's voice suddenly turned cold. "Fine. Have it your way. But Mom, the old building is going to be demolished soon. You shouldn't stay there too long." My heart sank. "How do you know about the demolition?" "I heard it from the neighbors." Julian was clearly flustered. I have a meeting to get to. I'll hang up now." The call ended. I stared at my phone, a tightness in my chest. He was still lying. I decided not to wait any longer. I would go to the community office today and revoke that power of attorney. The community office had just opened. Sarah was organizing files. She was a little surprised to see me. "Mrs. Chen, you're here again?" "Sarah, I want to revoke the previous power of attorney," I said directly. "What?" Sarah was stunned. "But your son said you weren't well." "I'm perfectly fine." I took out my ID from my bag. The signature on that power of attorney was forged. I knew nothing about it. Sarah's face changed. "This is a very serious matter." "I know," I nodded. "That's why I'm here to clarify the facts. My son and I are co-owners of the property. Any demolition agreement requires both our signatures, correct?" Sarah quickly pulled out the documents. "Yes, according to the regulations. That's correct. Mrs. Chen, would you like to discuss this with your son first?" "No need." My voice was calm but exceptionally firm. "Please help me with the revocation procedure. Also, please notify me directly of any progress regarding the demolition." After completing the paperwork, I walked out of the community office. The sun on my face felt like a weight had been lifted. For the first time in 3 years, I had made a decision for myself. For the first time, I had clearly said no. Back at the old house, I started to sort through some personal belongings. There were still a few of Arthur's clothes in the closet. I took them out and stroked them gently. They no longer carried his scent, but the warmth of his memory was still vivid. In the bedside table, there was a photo album filled with pictures of Julian from childhood to adulthood. I flipped through them one by one, tears blurring my vision. In the afternoon, Helen came to see me, bringing hot muffins and some homemade pickles. "Did it go smoothly at the community office?" she asked while helping me pack. "I took care of it." I nodded. "Sarah said they will issue a new notice requiring both parties to be present to sign. So, what are you going to do next?" I put down the photo album and sighed deeply. "I don't know. David said I'm entitled to a portion of the demolition money. I could buy a small condo for myself. But what? But I don't want to lose Julian and Leo." Tears finally broke through. "They're my only family." Helen hugged me, gently patting my back. "Silly woman, you're Julian's mother. That will never change. He might be influenced by Clara right now, but blood is thicker than water. One day, he'll understand." As we were talking, the doorbell suddenly rang. Helen went to open the door, then let out a surprised cry. "Eleanor, come and see this." I wiped my tears and walked to the door. The hallway was filled with large and small bags, baby formula, diapers, Leo's favorite snacks, and a few boxes of health supplements. On top of it all was a note. "Mom, we don't know where Leo's things are. Please use these for now. Love, Julian." I crouched down and looked through the items, a mixture of feelings in my heart. What was this? A carrot after the stick? Or did he genuinely care? "Should you call him?" Helen asked. I shook my head. "Let's wait a little longer." That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every corner of the old house reminded me of the past. At 2 a.m, my phone screen suddenly lit up. It was a photo from Clara. Leo's eyes were red and swollen from crying, and he was clutching the little teddy bear I made for him. The caption read, "Leo misses his grandma." My heart felt like it was being pricked by a needle. For 3 years, Leo had slept by my side almost every night. How scared he must be now. I almost grabbed the phone to call Julian, but in the end, I put it down. If they truly cared about my feelings, they wouldn't have forged my signature, wouldn't have planned to put me in the basement, and wouldn't have forgotten only me during a family celebration. On the 3rd morning, I decided to go for a walk. The park near the neighborhood was a place Arthur and I often visited. We would always sit on a bench and have breakfast after our morning exercises. The park hadn't changed much, only the trees were taller. I sat on our familiar bench, watching the morning light on the lake, lost in thought. "Mrs. Chen, is that you?" A gentle male voice came from behind. I turned around to see a spirited, elderly man with white hair and gold-rimmed glasses. He looked familiar. "I'm James Peterson. I used to be an English teacher at the high school. I was a colleague of your husband's," the man introduced himself with a smile. It was then that I remembered. "Mr. Peterson, it's been a long time." Mr. Peterson sat down next to me. "I heard you moved in with your son. What brings you back?" I briefly explained the situation. omitting the unpleasant parts. Mr. Peterson nodded without asking further questions. I live alone now, he said. After retiring, I joined the senior program at the community center. I teach a calligraphy class. Life is quite fulfilling. He took out his phone and showed me some photos of their activities, calligraphy exhibitions, poetry readings, a senior choir. The elderly people in the photos were all smiling, full of life. We have a calligraphy and painting exhibition next week at the Cultural Center, Mr. Peterson said warmly. Would you be interested in coming? Just as I was about to answer, my phone rang. It was Julian. I hesitated, then answered, Mom. Julian's voice was unusually anxious. Leo has a high fever. He keeps calling for Grandma. Can you come back and see him? My heart clenched. What's his temperature? 103.1. We just gave him some fever reducer, but it's not going down. Julian's voice was filled with unprecedented panic. We don't know what to do. I gripped the phone, my heart torn. Leo was sick. I should go back and take care of him. But if I went back just like that, what was the point of all my resolve? Mom, I'm begging you. Julian's voice choked up. Leo really needs you. In the end, my love for my grandson won. I'll be right back. After hanging up, I apologized to Mr. Peterson, explaining I had a family emergency. Mr. Peterson nodded in understanding and handed me a business card. Get in touch when you have time. The community center is always open to you. I hurried back to the old house, packed a few essentials, and called Helen to explain the situation. You're going back? Helen sounded worried. Leo is sick. I have to go see him, I sighed. But this time, I won't suffer in silence anymore. Helen called a taxi for me. Before I left, she hugged me tightly. Remember, you deserve to be respected. Call me anytime you need anything. Before getting in the car, I took one last look at the old house. This short escape had made me understand many things. I was no longer just a caregiver, a neglected mother and grandmother. I was a person with rights and dignity, deserving to be heard and respected. The taxi headed towards Julian's house. My heart was no longer as lost as it was when I left. No matter what I had to face next, I had found a part of myself again, the Eleanor who, besides being a mother and grandmother, still had her own life. When the taxi stopped downstairs at Julian's building, a light rain began to fall. I didn't have an umbrella, so I had to cover my head with my bag and run into the building. As the elevator ascended, my heart beat faster and faster, worried about Leo's condition and anxious about the confrontation to come. I inserted the key into the lock. The moment the door opened, I heard Leo's heart-wrenching cries. Without changing my shoes, I rushed directly to the children's room. Leo was lying on the bed, his little face flushed red from the fever, tears and snot covering his face. Clara was clumsily trying to take his temperature, while Julian stood nearby, holding a half-spilled cup of medicine. Seeing me, they both looked immensely relieved. Mom! Julian practically ran over. You're finally back. I ignored him and went straight to the bed, feeling Leo's scorching forehead. Leo opened his teary eyes, saw it was me, and immediately reached out his little hands. Grandma, it hurts. Where does it hurt, sweetie? I asked softly, expertly checking his throat and ears. My head hurts, Leo sobbed. I took the thermometer and measured again 102.7. It was indeed very high. I opened the medicine cabinet, found the cooling patches I always used, and stuck one on Leo's forehead. Then, I soaked a towel in warm water and gently wiped his hands and feet. Have you been to the hospital? I asked, my eyes not on Julian or Clara. Not yet, Clara stammered. We wanted to see if the fever reducer would work first. I took a deep breath, suppressing my frustration. With such a high fever for so long, it could be tonsillitis or an ear infection. He needs to go to the hospital, so we go now? Julian asked, his tone uncertain. Of course, now. I picked up Leo. He quieted down a little in my arms, his small hands clutching my collar tightly. Julian hurriedly grabbed the car keys, and Clara ran into the bedroom to change. Watching their frantic state, I suddenly realized that in the 3 years I had been taking care of Leo, they had barely participated in his daily care. They didn't even know the most basic responses. The emergency room at the children's hospital was always crowded. We waited for nearly an hour to see a doctor. The diagnosis was acute tonsillitis, requiring an IV drip of antibiotics. Leo burst into tears at the sight of the needle. I had to hold him, softly humming his favorite nursery rhyme to calm him down. As the nurse inserted the four, Julian and Clara stood by, helpless. The nurse gave them a strange look. The parents can help hold the child still. Only then did Julian step forward and awkwardly hold Leo's leg. The moment the needle went in, Leo cried even louder. My heart ached so much I almost cried too. It was late at night by the time the IV drip finished. Leo's fever had subsided a little, and he'd fallen asleep in my arms. On the way home, the car was silent, except for the sound of the rain hitting the windows and Leo's steady breathing. When we got home, I settled Leo in his bed and stayed by his side. Julian and Clara hovered at the doorway, seeming to want to say something but not daring to. You two go get some rest, I said without turning my head. I'll stay with Leo tonight. They left as if granted amnesty. I listened to their footsteps recede and sighed softly, tucking Leo in. At 3 a.m, Leo's fever finally broke, and his breathing became steady. I leaned back in the chair by his bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. My phone screen lit up. It was a message from Helen. How's Leo? Do you need my help? I replied. We've seen a doctor. He's stable now. Helen quickly replied. That's good. By the way, my nephew said if you need legal advice, you can contact him anytime. I had just put down my phone when I heard a soft knock on the door. Julian was standing there, holding a glass of warm milk. Mom, thank you for your hard work. He handed me the milk. Is Leo better? I took the milk and nodded. The fever's gone. He should be fine. Julian sat down by the bed, looking at the sleeping Leo, hesitating to speak. After a moment of silence, he finally said, Mom, where were you these past few days? We were really worried. I was at the old house, I said calmly. I saw the demolition notice, and I saw the power of attorney you forged with my signature. Julian's face turned pale instantly. Mom, let me explain. Explain what? My voice was still calm, but each word was as cold as an icicle. Explain how you handled the old house behind my back? Explain how you and Clara planned to use the demolition money to buy a townhouse? Or explain how you planned to have me live in the basement? Julian's eyes widened, clearly not expecting me to know so much. Mom, it's not what you think. We wanted to give you a surprise. Enough, I hissed, keeping my voice low so as not to wake Leo. You're still lying. Julian hung his head, his hands wringing nervously. I'm sorry, Mom. It was Clara. She said you were getting old, that we should just handle these things. So in your eyes, I'm already senile, not worthy of knowing my own house is being torn down? My voice trembled. Julian, that house was your father's and my life's work. And you so easily… Mom, Julian suddenly grabbed my hand. After the demolition money comes, we'll definitely give you a share. It's just that Clara has always wanted a bigger house, and you know how real estate prices are now? I pulled my hand back, feeling a chill in my heart. So how much were you planning to give me? A room in the basement? Julian was speechless, his eyes darting away. Just then, Leo turned over in his sleep and murmured, Grandma. We both looked at him, speechless for a moment. Go to bed, I finally said. We'll talk tomorrow. Julian, as if granted another amnesty, quickly left the room. I leaned back in the chair, looking at Leo's sleeping face, tears streaming down silently. This was the son I had raised. To please his wife, he could deceive his own mother like this. The next morning, Leo's fever was completely gone, and he was in much better spirits. I made him his favorite steamed egg custard, feeding it to him one small spoonful at a time. Clara came out of her room and saw this, her expression complicated. Mom, thank you for last night. I didn't respond, just focused on feeding Leo. Clara stood there awkwardly for a moment, then went to the kitchen to make coffee. Julian came out with dark circles under his eyes, obviously having not slept well all night. He sat across the dining table, wanting to speak but hesitating. Leo happily called out, Daddy, breaking the heavy atmosphere. Daddy, Grandma's back, Leo said, waving his arms. Julian forced a smile. Yes, Grandma's back. Is Leo happy? Happy, Leo answered loudly, then turned to me. Grandma's not leaving. I kissed his cheek. Grandma will always be with Leo. This sentence seemed to relieve Julian. The tense expression on his face softened. But I knew the problems between us were far from resolved. After breakfast, Clara went to work. Julian said he had taken a half-day off to help at home. While Leo was watching cartoons, Julian finally gathered the courage to speak. Mom, about the old house, can we talk properly? I put down the cleaning cloth and sat on the sofa. Go ahead. I'm listening. First, I apologize for handling the demolition behind your back, Julian said, his head bowed like a child who had done wrong. But you have to believe, we never intended to mistreat you. Then why forge my signature? I looked him straight in the eye. Julian avoided my gaze because Clara said you might not agree to demolishing the old house. After all, there are so many memories. So you just made the decision for me? I shook my head. Julian, I am your mother, not an elderly person whose life you can just arrange. I have the right to know, the right to decide. I was wrong, Mom. Julian's voice was tinged with tears. You can punish me however you want, just please don't be angry with me anymore. Seeing his red-rimmed eyes, my heart softened a bit, but then I remembered the documents and the plan, and it hardened again. I'm going to revoke that power of attorney. I will be personally involved in the demolition process. As for how the compensation money is divided, we need to have a serious talk. Julian nodded repeatedly. Whatever you say, Mom. As long as you don't leave this family, anything is fine. Julian, I interrupted him. I came back because Leo was sick, not because I've forgiven what you've done. We need time to talk properly and rebuild trust. Julian fell silent. After a long while, he said, Mom, you've changed. Yes, I have, I admitted frankly. I've realized that besides being your mother and Leo's grandmother, I am also myself, Eleanor. I have my own rights, my own feelings, my own needs. Julian seemed stunned by this, staring at me blankly. Just then, the phone rang. It was Clara. Julian answered and walked out to the balcony to talk. Through the glass door, I saw his expression change from surprise to anger, and finally to resignation. After hanging up, he came back with a grim face. What is it? I asked. Clara. She's not happy that you want to be involved in the compensation distribution, Julian said with difficulty. She says that money is very important for us to buy a house. I took a deep breath. So in her eyes, my rights are less important than your plan to buy a house. Julian didn't answer, but his silence said everything. My heart turned completely cold. Mom, Julian finally spoke, his voice cold and stiff. Have you had enough? Leo has been crying non-stop. Clara's work has been affected, and now you want to interfere with the demolition money. Can't you be a little more considerate of us? I looked at him in shock, unable to believe these words came from the son I had worked so hard to raise. All the grievances, anger, and sadness churned in my chest, but I maintained a calm facade. Julian, I said slowly, legally, I am entitled to a portion of the demolition money from the old house. As for taking care of Leo, I do it out of love, not obligation. Julian's expression stiffened. What do you mean? I looked him straight in the eye. If you and Clara think I'm just a free nanny and a cash machine you can dispose of at will, you are mistaken. Julian's phone rang again. He glanced at it and irritably rejected the call. Mom, can we please not fight? How much money do you want? Just say it. The words stabbed me like a knife. I stood up, my voice trembling. You think all I want is money? Julian, what I want is respect. To be treated as a person with thoughts and feelings, not an accessory in your lives. Leo was frightened by our argument and started to sob. I quickly went to him and held him, soothing him softly. Julian stood by, his expression complex. Once Leo calmed down, I decided to bring up the key issue. The demolition appraisal is about $300,000, right? Julian was clearly flustered. How? How did you know? I asked at the community office, I said calmly. They also told me you had already submitted the documents, intending to handle everything yourself. Julian's face turned red, then pale. "Mom, we can discuss this properly." "Discuss?" I gave a bitter laugh. "If I hadn't found out, would you have discussed it with me?" Julian was speechless. He turned and walked to the balcony to call Clara again. This time, he kept his voice very low, but I still caught phrases like, "My mom knows everything. She's going to revoke the power of attorney, and what do we do?" After the call, Julian's attitude suddenly changed. "Mom, Clara said she wants to treat you to dinner tonight, to have a good talk. I sense there must be a reason behind this sudden shift. No need. We can talk at home if there's anything to say." "But Julian," I interrupted him, "since when did we, mother and son, need to be so formal?" He fell silent again. The atmosphere became awkward. Leo seemed to sense it and clung to me tightly. In the afternoon, Clara came home early, carrying a box of exquisite pastries. She put on a smile as soon as she walked in. "Mom, I heard you like the walnut crisps from this place. I bought some especially for you." I thanked her but didn't engage further. Clara awkwardly placed the pastries on the table, then pulled Julian into the bedroom. Before closing the door, I heard her whisper, "We have to appease her." Otherwise, the door closed, and I couldn't hear the rest, but it was enough to make my heart sink. As expected, their kindness had an ulterior motive. Clara took the initiative to cook dinner, which was extremely rare. At the dinner table, she kept putting food on my plate, asking about my well-being, but I could see the calculation behind her smile. "Mom," Clara finally got to the point. "I heard you know about the demolition." I nodded and continued eating. "Actually, we wanted to give you a surprise," Clara said sweetly. "We plan to use the demolition money to buy a big house and prepare a large, south-facing room for you." I put down my chopsticks and looked her straight in the eye. "Really? Then why did the note I found in Julian's study say the basement is close to the kitchen, convenient for Mom to cook?" Clara's smile froze on her face. Julian was so shocked he dropped his chopsticks. "Mom, you went through my study?" Julian stammered. "I was looking for Leo's vaccination records the other day," I explained calmly, "and I saw it by accident." After an awkward silence, Clara's expression suddenly changed. "Since you know everything, let's just be direct. We do have an urgent need for the demolition money. Aren't you living here just fine? Why do you have to fight over that bit of money?" "Clara," Julian tried to stop her. "Don't stop me," Clara said shrilly. "Do you know how expensive it is to raise a child now? Do you know how high real estate prices are? We finally have a chance to get a bigger house. As an elder, shouldn't you be supportive?" I looked at this once gentle and lovely daughter-in-law and suddenly felt she was a complete stranger. And my son just sat there, saying nothing. "Clara," I stood up slowly. "First, that's not just your money. Second, respect is mutual. You plan celebrations without inviting me, tell me to eat leftovers, handle my house behind my back, and now you accuse me of fighting for money. Is this how you treat your elders?" Clara wanted to say more, but Leo suddenly started crying. I picked up my grandson and left the dining table. Behind me, I heard Julian and Clara begin to argue in low voices. That night, I slept with Leo in the children's room. In the dead of night, I gently stroked Leo's soft hair, thinking about the future. It was clear that in this family, I had gone from being a family member to a burden and an obstacle. But at 68, did I not have the right to choose? Looking at Leo's sleeping face, I secretly made a decision. It was time to live for myself. Not just for me, but also to show Leo that even at nearly 70, a person could live with dignity. The morning sun filtered through the gap in the curtains. I rose gently, trying not to wake Leo sleeping beside me. After last night's argument, the atmosphere in the house was still tense, but at least Leo's fever was gone, which was a relief. In the kitchen, I put water on to boil for oatmeal, moving as quietly as possible. There weren't many ingredients in the fridge. I found a few mushrooms and some greens, planning to make a light mushroom and vegetable oatmeal. As I chopped the vegetables, my thoughts drifted back to the community center Mr. Peterson had mentioned. Calligraphy. I had been obsessed with it for a while when I was young, but then work and family got in the way. Picking it up again now might be a good choice. By the time the oatmeal was ready, Julian walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Mom,